All right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Jeff Hewitt. I'm the Director of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction. We are live streaming this session tonight around our Health K-12 curricula. I'm going to switch over to my presentation at this time. It's myself here as well as our superintendent.
Hello, everyone. Tony Suzo. Just as we start, just a reminder, we will be not only obviously live streaming, but recording the presentation. So tomorrow morning, I will send out the presentation slides along with the recording. It also will be available and archived on our website for any future use.
Thank you, Mr. Souza. So yes, this is our parent presentation tonight, specific to our curricula in the area of health education, because there were some new standards that have come out and were submitted from the state and required from the state be implemented in our curriculum starting in September of 2022, which is now. Back in on June 1st, actually the end of last school year, we held a session just like this where we did talk about the new standards and what that process would look like and how the curriculum would be aligned to those standards. And that presentation is actually still posted on our website. It's from the homepage at the district tab, at the For Parents tab under Curriculum Assessment and Instruction. And I'm just showing you where that is right now. You'll see that both the slide deck as well as the recording from that June 1st presentation is still posted there and accessible. So for tonight, now we're talking about the actual curricula updates that have taken place through the summer curriculum writing that happened this past summer. So hopefully you can see the full slide now in full slide mode. Just jumping into our objectives, there's two main objectives for this evening. One is we really just want to be transparent. If you have questions, please ask. We want to be transparent about the new standards that are out, be transparent about how they are implemented within our curriculum here in South Hunterdon. We do have a little bit of flexibility. Obviously, the standards are required to be taught throughout the district based on the state's requirements, but we do have a little bit of flexibility in how we do that in our curricula here in the district. In addition to that, we just wanted to make sure that we do provide resources that can support both parents as well as educators in implementing those new standards. So there's a number of laws that are in place, and some of these, I apologize if you watched back in June, are a little redundant. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with an understanding around the standards, that all standards that we teach in South Hunterdon or any New Jersey school do have some requirements that focus on basically diversity, equity, inclusion, specifically around the Amistad Law, which allows us to make sure that we acknowledge contributions of African Americans in all standards, not just health standards, but all standards at both the elementary and secondary level. Also, there's a law around Holocaust and making sure that we discuss everything that you see written there in that blurb around the Holocaust law, and that's again an elementary and secondary law. And then the LGBT and disabilities law that went into effect a couple of years ago, making sure, again, that we're looking at the contributions of persons with disabilities and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in both middle school and high school. Continuing along that same thread, I guess, diversity and inclusion instruction is now a requirement as well, beginning in the 21-22 school year for kindergarten through 12th grade. So you'll notice I highlighted some pieces. I know there's a lot of words on this slide, so I apologize for that, but I tried to boldface some of the key things. One, it started in the 21-22 school year. Two, diversity and inclusion is required in our instruction for kindergarten through 12th grade. And the whole purpose is really around highlighting and promoting diversity. And you'll notice the list in number one there, including economic diversity, equity, inclusion, tolerance, and belonging in connection with gender and sexual orientation, race and ethnicity, disabilities, and religious tolerance. And then I also wanted to highlight the number three, because the essence, I feel, of all of this legislation is really around encouraging safe, welcoming, and inclusive environments for all students that come through our doors. And you'll see again a list of specific groups that the law mentions. The next law that was a little bit newer as well is around declarations related. This part is really talking more about information around sexual assault. And you'll notice, again, lots of words on this slide. I tried to highlight some parts of it, but this is recognizing a rise in, unfortunately, a high rate of sexual assault on college campuses. Through studies that have been done. And you'll notice in letter A, 23% of female undergraduates and 5% of male undergraduates have experienced rape or sexual assault through physical force, violence, or incapacitation. And so therefore, they have declared some more data here and made a point to recognize the need for awareness around consent and also basically it says the awareness on the nature and the need for consent before physical contact or sexual activity, and the importance of that at an earlier age to make sure students understand that. Also, further law around sexual abuse and assault awareness and prevention education. This is a live link. In addition to the recording of this, I will be sending out the slide deck, or Mr. Souza will be sending out the slide deck, so you'll have access to the presentation and be able to click on these links. But basically, the links go directly to that law. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm not going to go to every single link tonight, but the links are there for further information. But specifically, talking about sexual abuse and assault awareness and prevention in grades preschool through 12th grade. So this is a law that went into effect and through the standards, obviously in 2019, a few years back, and the health standards specifically, you'll notice New Jersey Student Learning Standards in Comprehensive Health and Physical Education are listed as the specific area where this would be addressed. And this goes from the preschool age of just understanding, trusted adults to talk to, good touch, bad touch, all the way up to, we'll see further legislation around, sexual assault and sexting and things like that at the upper grades. Again, another newer law that looks at grades 6 through 12 that is focused on physical contact and sexual activity. And again, the focus is really consent. And so throughout our standards in these grade levels, 6 through 12, our curricula have been updated to focus on awareness around just that physical consent for physical contact and sexual activity. This is the law I briefly mentioned earlier around sexting, and it is required. Unfortunately, it is something that does need to be addressed during middle school as well. And you'll notice in our curricula, it's in middle school ages. The state considers 6th grade middle school, 6, 7, 8 is our middle school ages. And then also at the high school level regarding sexting. Unfortunately, this is something that we do need to address because it is a reality for our students. As far as inclusion of mental health and the relation of physical and mental health to health education programs, there is a requirement that's more recent as well. Again, I highlighted grades kindergarten through 12th grade, talking about just mental health and well-being and how to care for yourself. This ties directly to our social and emotional learning competencies and our initiatives as a district. As ways to calm ourselves and be aware of ourselves and our interactions with others and how to take care of ourselves. And then also continue with New Jersey law, another law, the New Jersey Safe Haven Infant Protection Act, which is something that is at the high school level specific to, basically you can click on this link, I will click there because it basically gives a nice overview of exactly what that is. No shame, no blame, no names. You notice in the dark bar in about the middle of the screen there, which provides access for students that are looking to surrender an unwanted infant, or people that are looking to surrender an unwanted infant, unfortunately, safely, legally, and anonymously, as the site says here. But that is another law that is taught at the high school level. Particularly, you'll see it in our curriculum in grades 11 and 12. And then in the presentation, I just included just a copy of the student learning standards for health and physical education. So there's a link to the full set of the 2020 standards. That was there in my last presentation as well. I did decide to add a full set of the 2014 standards as well, if you wanted to go and look at the older standards. I'm not expecting you to go through the many, many pages of standards and try to do a comparison. You'll see another document I have later in this presentation to kind of help with very specific changes. But I did come across a link where you could go and look back at the 2014 standards if you wanted to do so. Obviously, we are working from the 2020 standards in the curriculum documents that we're teaching beginning this month. So some of the basic changes that had occurred, the grade level bands have changed. We now have, by the end of second grade, standards by the end of fifth grade, standards by the end of eighth grade, and standards by the end of 12th grade. It's a little different than the older standards. The requirement is obviously by this month that I've said a couple of times, September 2022, that we implement these new standards. And they basically broke down the disciplinary concepts and core ideas. And there's an example there of exactly what that looks like. A core idea might be that all living things may have the capacity to reproduce, whereas the actual performance expectation of what students would understand as a result of that core idea is they would actually be defining reproduction and explaining the ways in which parents may care for their offspring. Those are two of the newer standards at the second grade level. And as we look at that standard 2.1.2 pp.1, the 2.1 is just one of three sets of the standards. The second two in that sequence of coding indicates by the end of second grade. The PP stands for parenting and pregnancy. And then the one is just that first performance expectation within that standard. So there is a rhyme or reason to that coding, a method to the madness, yes. So additional basic changes. Basically, we used to have 6 different standards in health and physical education. It's now broken down into just 3. All of those 6 same areas are still included, but broken and compartmentalized into these 3 areas of 2.1, which is personal and mental health, 2.2 for physical wellness. Mostly your PE standards are found in 2.2, and then 2.3 for safety. Some of the physical education standards and things in those curricula are also under safety as well. So the first one, personal and mental health, you'll see the primary areas here. So like personal growth and development is abbreviated as PG, pregnancy and parenting is abbreviated as PP, emotional health you'll see as EH. So as you look through the standards and see these codes, social and sexual health is SSH and so forth. So I included this breakdown here so you can kind of see an idea of what areas the different components of the standards are addressing. Physical wellness also has 4 areas. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of this ties to physical education. Nutrition is also taught in health, however, so there is a little bit of each in both health and PE classes. And then safety, this involves both physical as well as mental health and safety. All of our standards now, all the New Jersey standards from 2020 have a set of practices. Here are the 10 practices that are specific to health and physical education. This is the basis really of what the skills are that they're hoping students to come away from. You'll notice things like resolving conflict, making decisions, managing yourself. These are all of those kinds of skills that students should walk away from as a result of the health classes and physical education classes. I shared this before too. There's three different terms here. The standards are really what the state puts out that's required. That's kind of the skeleton of how we build our curriculum. We start there. We have to make sure we're looking at the standards and addressing all the standards that are expected from the state. And then the curriculum takes those standards and puts into place experiences that students will have in the instruction that allows them to gain the knowledge or skills from the standards. And then our resources are things like textbooks, websites, handouts, different, anything and everything you can think of as far as resources, whether it's technological or, paper, pencil, or learning experience type activities. Our curriculum writing process too. So this is what we went through this past summer. In 2020, actually, the student learning standards had come out initially. They were initially expected to be implemented by September 2021, but the state pushed that back to 2022 due to the pandemic. But we received the standards. We took those standards and we were able to work in teams of educators, myself included, myself along with the health teachers throughout the district, work together to organize those standards and put that information into our district template for curriculum writing. And then we basically, once we put that all together, then I would review the overall documents, as well as other key administrators, including principals, vice principals, Mr. Suzo, and other teachers too that maybe weren't on the teams have an opportunity to look at curricular documents. We take it to the Board of Ed Curriculum and Technology Committee, which meets once a month prior to the board meeting. And then at that time, they receive the curriculum in advance of that meeting so that we can answer any questions kind of as a first read, basically at the committee meetings. And then it goes from there to the full board for approval. And then finally it is approved. If approved, it goes to our district website. And at that point, it's public and everybody has access to look at the full curricular documents. And there's a link to that, but we will look a little bit further at that as well. So what are these specific changes in our standards that are addressed in our curriculum this year? Here's a link. I will click on this link. It's Google Sheets, and what it is, it's all of our standards. And at the bottom, you'll notice EOG2, EOG5, EOG8. That's end of grade 2, end of grade 5, end of grade 8. And when you click on any one of those tabs down at the bottom, you'll see a complete list of standards. And the ones that are highlighted in yellow are standards that are either new or that have been changed in some way. So wanted to make it very clear some of the newer standards that are listed here. And then specifically, whether it was 6H in this case is 6th grade health, 6th grade PE classes, 7th grade health, 8th grade health, or 7th, 8th grade PE. So as you scroll through, you can see specifically what's taught at which grade levels. And so you might see a lot of yellow here. In some cases, like for example, I was just looking at this K2 document and it says, for example, explain healthy ways for friends to express feelings for and to one another. Obviously, that's a new standard. I guess my point is there are some standards I feel that some people have more concern over than others. And as you look at all of this yellow, I don't want you to think I only highlighted standards that people have major concern over. It truly is changes. So things like, even though it's in that SSH, which stands for social and sexual health, this standard number 9 is define bullying and teasing and explain why they're wrong and harmful. That's just a new standard that was reworded. Obviously, I don't believe that I've heard any controversy or concern over a standard like that, but it's highlighted in yellow because it's new. So I just wanted to point that out. So this, again, is a live link that everyone does have access to be able to view and look at. And so please feel free to go to the PowerPoints or the Google slide deck and utilize that link for more specifics. As far as accessing the curricula, so I mentioned earlier, it's available on our website for everything. There's a direct link here right to the page. However, then I gave directions as well, because when you go to that link, it looks like a Google Drive, and it is. It's a folder in Google Drive. But from our district homepage, if you go to the district tab and down to curriculum and assessment and instruction, and then pre-K-12 curricula, it takes you directly to that page where you'll see all of the standards for all of our curricula, and our health and physical education curricula are listed here as well. As you look at health and physical education, please notice that PE and health are broken out. So for example, at the top of the screen, you'll see 3rd, 4th PE. You're not going to find the health standards there because that's just physical education. But as you scroll down to the ones that say updated 2022, you'll notice 3rd, 4th health here, and you'll see the full health documents here. And I'll just open one of them. I was going to open the K2 document actually first. And as that document loads, you'll notice it goes right into a Google Doc. One thing that you might find helpful, this is just a technology, something that may help you if you're looking for something specific, because you'll notice that the document's actually 35 pages long. So if you do Control F, you will find this little pop-up screen that's find in document. So you could type in anything like bullying, and right away you see that bully comes up 9 times. And then you can scroll through the document. If that's something of interest to you, you'll see here's how to resolve conflicts and prevent bullying, right in the essential questions in that unit in the curriculum. But it'll take you to anywhere that term is listed. And so that's a great tool to use in any of our curricular documents to find if there's something specific you're looking for that you're concerned about and want to see how it's addressed. That's a great tool to use to be able to find that information. Let's see. Jump back here. And so these directions are exactly what I just went through as far as getting to the curricular documents from our website. Oh, and the other thing, I just noticed my own note here, the folder titled Curricular Materials Forms. I'm just going to jump back to our main document here. So it's at the curricular main page. There's a folder that's actually called Curricular Material Forms. And if I double click on that, you'll find 2 forms here. There's a form here that is used if you want to basically challenge any of the district materials or resources that are utilized in any of our courses or anywhere throughout our district. But then there's also the opt-out form. Just for your knowledge, there are some laws that we talked about at the beginning of this presentation around diversity, inclusion, and equity and things that are required K-12 in all of our courses, not just health and PE. But the standards that are listed in the new health standards that are specific to pregnancy and parenting, as well as social and sexual health, those standards are sections that can be opted out of if you choose to. So this is the form that would be used to complete, to have your child opt out. It asks you to just put their name, their grade level, the school, and their health teacher's name, and then to be specific about which area you'd like to opt out from. And then basically an explanation as to why. And then there is obviously a place to sign off and things. The form comes back to me. And it does note here, I know one of the questions is, well, if they opt out, where do they go? So there is a sentence here that explains, or a couple of sentences explaining that your child will be able to go to an alternate location. Typically, that's probably the library to read, maybe the counselor's office, obviously supervised by an adult in the school for that class period or periods, depending on what you're opting out of. So, let's see. And then I mentioned resources. So I broke resources out. Again, a lot of these were listed in the last presentation as well, but around personal and mental health, there's some great resources that the state has put out. If you didn't notice back in the law, it does mention that the commissioner at the state level would be supplying resources for schools. A lot of the resources we use in our instruction come from directly here. And so there's a list of resources around the first standard, personal and mental health, a list of resources around physical wellness, and a list of resources specific to standard 3, which is focused on safety. Just a few key points that I wanted to note, that we will be notifying parents prior to standards that may be in those areas of pregnancy and parenting or social and sexual health, notifying parents prior to the lessons being taught. There is that opt-out form. This is a direct link to that form. And obviously communication is key. So please, if you ever have questions, reach out, pick up the phone, talk to the teacher, talk to your principal, talk to me, talk to Tony, but please reach out. Obviously your teacher is the first person to talk to. They're the ones with your child in the classroom and that are delivering the instruction. So that would be a great place to begin. But of course, any of us would be happy to help. And just a reminder too, I mentioned this prior as well, that there are lots of supports around and throughout our schools that can be accessible for students if they have questions, if you have questions, or if they're feeling, they want to talk about something, but don't want to bring it up in a health class, things like that. So I'm at the point for questions, but I'm going to go back real quick and then take questions because I wanted to just jump back to the curriculum documents and particularly just show how it's a little bit different. So I guess I'm in second grade, K2 right now. I'm in that K2 health curriculum document. I'm going to close out my search bar. But as you scroll through, you'll notice it's a K2 document. So every standard that's listed by the end of second grade is not taught necessarily in kindergarten, first and second grade. So as you scroll through, you'll notice in the tables under the instructional plan of each unit that there's the student learning objectives, which list the specific standards. And then for like K2, you'll see here's the kindergarten specific activities versus the first grade specific activities versus the second grade specific activities. So it's broken down to show you specifically what's happening at each grade level within that band, so that so there's hopefully no confusion about what second grade or first grade or kindergarten is going to do with that standard. And specifically, just looking like under sexual health too, we were very explicit, I guess, as far as showing the actual lesson plans within the curricular documents for those particular lessons that we've heard concerns about. So if you were to click on second grade sexual health lesson plan, you'll see what the teachers are actually teaching from with the actual standards, the objectives, and the activities broken down and described very clearly. So if you are opting to opt out, I would hope that you would go and look at this very specific lesson plan and understand exactly what you're opting out of. I think knowledge is power, right? And again, going back to my first slide with the objectives, we want to be as transparent as possible. And so we tried to put everything right here very clearly and almost scripted out what the lessons would look like in the classroom. Along with that too, obviously I have to kind of put the disclaimer out there. Students are going to ask questions in health classes too. So there is a lesson plan here. That's what's planned to be followed, but students will be asking questions. And obviously our health teachers, I'm sure in many cases will say, that's a great question. Let's talk about that later, or talk about someone at home. That's a great question to talk about with someone at home. Not necessarily every question that gets brought up in a health class is appropriate for the entire group necessarily. And so we've had a lot of conversation around that and how to address that in the classroom. So I just wanted to touch base on that as well. So with that, I will go back to my final slide and ask if there are any questions.
I have a question. It's not about the controversial stuff, but just one of the things that I was curious about in terms of say mental health, and just as you were scrolling through, like I noticed that, and understandably, you know, there's going to be a link between taking care of yourself and how that's going to help promote mental health. But I'm wondering, and I think this would pertain more to, you know, more like middle school, high school. But one thing that I've thought about before is, you know, sometimes if you're struggling with like anxiety or depression or whatever, that it can be circumstantial, but there's also, for some people, it's going to be chronic. It's not going to be something that you can, you know, change your behavior or attitude out of. Does that get addressed, like the fact that, you know, sometimes there's not going to be, it's not going to be, you know, talk to a counselor or possibly do medication, but that for some people it's a little bit more complicated and you know, could be like a chronic lifelong, but you'll still be okay. Like, does that come in there?
It does. So the mental health standards and things really do talk about degrees of need for help and different levels of support that are available, because sometimes it is beyond what the school has to offer, right? And for students to understand too that mental health experiences they may be having at the moment don't need to be lifelong, and many times are not lifelong. These supports can help bring you beyond that.
Right.
So yes, that's part of
I
it.
just wanted to make sure it was because they know that the kids learn about mental health and a lot of the different, you know, diagnoses and things, but just the fact that, you know, it is so different for different.
Right.
people,
Yeah.
you
It's a
know.
continuum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciate this presentation, but it's really mirrors last when we meet in June.
Mhm.
So I thought tonight was going to be more meat and bones of the curriculum from your point of view, other than going and researching that may help. But I do have a question. So when in June, is that when
It was June 1st. Yep.
you went into a little more detail about the standards of what the state requires, and I believe it is in parentheses what they would request you to do, but you're not necessarily required to do.
Yes.
So what percentage did our district follow with that? Did they go and follow everything that was in that, which was requested, or did they pull back on some of that info? How did you as a district handle that?
Sure. So for example, well, first of all, just to go into the kind of the meat and bones of the changes, that's what I was hoping this document would allow, like just highlighting everything, because it gives you a little bit more details about some of the very specific topics. But at the same time, like for the second part of the question around the pieces in parentheses, and right here is not a good example when you have animals, people, and fish in parentheses, as opposed to some of the other standards that have some more controversial examples. But as far, I don't have a percentage for you, but I can say that we focused on the actual standard, not what's in parentheses, but to use the parentheses more or less as something that we need to be aware of as we're teaching that standard, as examples that could come up. Students may bring up things in discussion and things, and to kind of, I think the point of what's in parentheses is so that teachers have it in their mind and are prepared should something like that come up. Like that's an example of what that standard's trying to get at. And so I can't say specific things that are parentheses are all included. I can't even say, I can't say they're not included, because there are some of those topics that are in parentheses that are certainly you're gonna see in lesson plans, you know, that are listed there. But we,
controversial part or less controversial?
so there's a specific standard in, for example, by the end of grade 8, that is one of the controversial ones, and it's under social and sexual health, define vaginal, oral, and anal sex. This is a 6th, 7th, 8th grade standard. This is not something that's going to be fully addressed in 6th grade. 6th grade also talks about intercourse. And so vaginal sex is certainly discussed and defined in 6th grade. Oral and anal sex are not discussed until 7th, 8th grade. And our 7th, 8th grade curriculum alternate 7th and 8th grade. So it depends on the
Well, that's
year.
next question.
So it's 7th, 8th.
And you have even said yourself that each year children mature.
Mhm.
So if you flip the coin and your 7th graders, it's just, they're mixed together. So why are they not at this point in time with their maturity level and the maturity level of the content being separated out?
So we're not separating the students out by gender. We are separating biological girls out for the menstruation lesson in 4th grade. But outside of that, we're not separating
But
by,
not that, 7th graders, and 8th
Mhm.
graders, why are they being taught at this maturity level?
Part
When
of
we
it-
know that each year your maturity level grows, but yet you're asking, I had an 11th grader who was 11 years old. And you have, is a lot different than a 7th grader who is 13.
sure. And we know, just like mental health's on a continuum, developmentally, kids are on a continuum as far as what they are prepared and comfortable learning about. But at the same time, when we're talking about health standards, and I have to say, like, in working with the teachers this summer too, just knowing the questions they've gotten in class from students when we talked about standards that were addressed, by the end of 8th grade. And when they're getting questions like that in 4th or 5th grade, and they're like, but we can't teach it till 6, 7, 8. And it's probably, when we think of our whole community, we want to wait maybe till 7th, 8th grade even, and things like that. I think that we're not separating kids, going back to that initial question, basically because kids are talking about it in mixed groups. Kids are hearing about it in mixed group. It is the same information. We don't want biological girls to be thought of as learning something that boys aren't allowed to.
No, I'm not
hear
talking
about
sexual.
or
I'm
things.
talking about age.
Mhm.
I'm talking about 7th graders being taught with 8th graders when their maturity levels, whether they're boys.
Oh, I see what you're saying. The mixed, I'm sorry, I missed that point. I was thinking of, just 7th and 8th grade curriculum are similar, are the same, like they're teaching the same curriculum each year. Why are they not separated? It does come down to some
But you're saying-
scheduling,
but you're saying that
staffing.
Some of these 7th graders don't necessarily need to learn this until the end of 8th grade. So you advance it from 7th grade to 8th grade. I mean, I know that it's a divided into 8th grade.
Mhm.
So instead of teaching them in 8th grade, you're teaching them in 7th.
We are.
Could be a ladder.
Yeah.
So
But
a ladder in 7, depending upon the time when we decide to teach it.
And
Can I chime in?
Yeah.
This other thing, so I've told both my kids this horror story about the first time I ever heard somebody talking about what menstruation was. And I was in 2nd grade and I was in daily terror for the next several years. Because I heard it from a kid, my older sister's friend told her. And it's funny because recently my younger daughter, who I had explained what menstruation was when she was littler, but she goes, oh, one of my friends told me a couple of years ago, and she described it. And of course, it's completely inaccurate. And I was like, holy moly. I feel like with a lot of this stuff, I mean, by 7th grade, there may be kids who are already being pressured or not pressured, but maybe engaging in, consensually in a lot of these things. I think a lot of them have heard of it, and it must have been at least 2 years ago. So when my daughter was in 3rd or 4th grade, she said, oh, a friend told me, and basically it was a description of anal sex. And I was like, where'd she hear that? But I mean, it kind of, and then she did ask me at some point, and it was sort of this long road where we were reading a book And there was a girl whose mother was a single mom who had had her child at age 16. And, you know, I never said you needed to be an adult or married to have a kid. And she was like, whoa. And then it came to like, well, why did she want to have a kid? And I was like, well, she probably didn't. What? People have sex when they don't, you know, like, why would you do that? And then she said, well, what about same-sex couples? How do they have sex? And, you know, and she's somebody that I could explain this to, like, where she is in terms of what she's asking and what I think she can handle. But my point is that this stuff gets talked about, whether it's in a serious, fact-based way, or whether it's kids because they hear something and they think it's funny, or because they think it's, you know, racy. To me, by the time kids are in middle school, this stuff is out there, and I believe that knowledge, having correct knowledge is so important, and that it's scarier when you know something exists but nobody's telling you about it. And I also think that, you know, like I said, when my daughter was like, whoa, wait, how can a 16-year-old have a baby? Well, it never occurred. You know what I mean? I think kids are information is going to land for them. That's the information they're seeking and that they need. And that if you're in middle school and, you know, you might say, oh my gosh, you know, oral anal sex, what? Then you can ask questions, but at least you have the correct information. So to me, I feel like that's already out there before kids get to that age. I didn't read everything, but the things that I did read, I thought that by the time stuff gets addressed, it's like kind of already there a little bit, has come up, you know, and I think especially for kids who really need it, again, this may be something that's coming into their world, that they do need people who care about them, acknowledging that this is a thing, and you know, address what you think is appropriate to address in school, and then say, well, if you need more information, you have your parents or you have these resources that you can go to. So that's my feeling.
I think at the end of the day, this is where the parenting comes
So
in.
exactly, and I don't mean any disrespect, but my head is not in the sand. I understand what kids talk about. I've been in high school, I've been in middle school, you know, we've all talked about it. My head is not in the sand. What I do think though, is that this goes into some real depth of what should be talked about at home and at the level at which parents want their children to know at what depth, at what age, because each child is aware of their child and children. And I do agree that there should be some conversation so that children feel comfortable coming to a trusted adult, which hopefully is the teacher. But there are times too when the how in depth this goes for the age, to my opinion, robs them of their innocence and their maturity of allowing our kids to be kids without worrying about some of this. But that, you know, and that's where I have an issue. I have no problem with them learning about sexual health, but the depth in which it goes to. And what, you know, and we can have the disclaimer that kids are gonna ask questions in class. They're talking about it in the hallway too. But at what point do you say, go home and talk to your family? You know, there's a line that has to be drawn something, and that's where I want to see kids safe. I don't want to see kids, you know, harmed sexually or in any bad position. But I also need to worry about my daughter, who is immature for her age when it comes to that. And it's not because some of this stuff hasn't been addressed, that's just her personality. So at what point in middle school are there specific dates, like in the elementary school, that these things are discussed?
There are.
You can withdraw your child.
There are. So and thank you for bringing that up, because I wanted to mention it earlier too. I didn't put it in the presentation because I don't want to put anything in stone. I did mention that we would be reaching out about, you know, prior to the lessons being taught. But there are timelines for those standards that can be opted out of. And none of them begin until after winter break. So it's like the second half of the year, third, fourth marking period at all the grade levels. So it is something that,
And
You-
can I interrupt?
Yep.
So previously, when my other two were in middle school, you didn't know when these conversations took place. When probably it's more important for the topic at hand. Has that changed in the last 2 or 3 years? Are you notified in middle school and health of when these?
I don't think, I mean.
it will this year.
This year.
Yeah.
We've talked already with our educators about it. Because of the changes, we think it's important for us to be as proactive.
Especially with parents having the opt-out option. You need to know when to opt out. So,
Is that, but you need to be able as a parent, I want to have a conversation
right.
and make sure that we're all on the same page. If you choose to opt in.
And I hope that parents will have those follow-up conversations, quite honestly. I think that that's another good point to bring up. With that understanding that the lessons are going to happen and that they have happened, it gives parents that opportunity to have those conversations, which are really, really important, because there are going to be things that, spark interest or questions in students' minds that they're going to want to talk to, but not in a classroom, in the whole class. So at home would be that safe place to do that.
I also do think that opting out is putting a scarlet letter.
I thought about that, to be honest, because I know that's come up before. And I was thinking about the past year, and I was actually just today walking the halls and saw like our mask optional signs around, and how students are able to choose to wear a mask, not wear a mask, and it's not been an issue. You know what I mean? Like they can really, as controversial as that topic may
It's
be,
already happening. It's been
you know.
happening already before this year. I've seen it myself personally, where kids come down. And even not necessarily, health class, it could be something else, trigger something, whatever, we're flexible with that, so.
And they don't need to opt, they could get up and walk out of the classroom and come down somewhere else without.
Yeah,
worrying if they're
Absolutely.
back.
Yeah, if they're in the middle of a lesson and all of a sudden they're feeling uncomfortable, yeah, absolutely.
Because, and I think I said this to Jeff too, we've all taken, if we have worked in any kind of corporation or business, we have all taken a sexual harassment. And if one of us starts talking in a way that makes another person feel uncomfortable, we would get charged with sexual harassment. And I don't feel like our kids have enough, maybe sometimes they might not feel comfortable to get up and walk out because of the topic. And that's my concern, that some kids might feel, I have to say.
they do have that option in our health classes. If they're ever in a conversation in a classroom where they're not comfortable and things, they would have that option, whether it's to go to guidance, to the nurse, to the restroom, to get a drink, whatever it might be, to get up, take a walk. That does happen.
I think that there are a lot of parents who start very early having these important conversations and have, understand who their kids are and what they're ready to learn. Some parents aren't going to. My parents never talked about sex with me ever. Or told me I was going to menstruate. Like, I learned it from a fifth grader. And some parents aren't going to for whatever reason. And I think that there are a lot of kids who really do need this information, which is why it is part of what a school is doing. So, I think so much that it has to be there. And I don't think, and I don't know if this is what you were saying, Ellen, but I don't think that anything in this curricula would in any way fall as like sexual harassment. Like
No, what I'm
sometimes
saying is that anytime that you talk, we've been talking, any sexual harassment, anytime. If someone came in and talked about anal sex or masturbation or any of these topics that second, sixth, fifth, however old has to learn. And you were talking about it made me uncomfortable, I could, file a complaint. And what we're doing is then asking 7-year-olds to sit in classrooms or 8-year-olds and listen to that. But they've also been taught, you have to sit here and be respectful because this is how the school structure you know.
Just to clarify, we're not, those topics you
I
mentioned, we're not talking about with that age level. So
Okay, I'm sorry.
But I don't-
just to
I'm
clarify.
sorry, it's 10 years old, my bad.
I think
But my point is, I understand too that not all parents want for their kids. I do understand that this is important. I have a problem with some of the levels at which we're asking these children to be controlled. That's my issue.
I find that for me personally, and I think it's true for kids, sometimes you have to be uncomfortable and sit with that discomfort in order to learn something. I think that there's a difference between being uncomfortable because you're learning something new and something that might seem really strange or, you know, what's going on, and being harmed. And so I do think, and I know, I would think probably that the health teachers will say, they'll let them know ahead of time, they'll let them know that day, this is what we're going to be addressing. If anybody feels uncomfortable, and it won't, it doesn't have to be as obvious as a kid, you know, getting up and walking out, but you know, we can do this in a way where you can kind of signal me, or like you said, like if you ask for a drink of water, I get it, you know, that you're leaving. And so I think that without having to put too much burden on the kids, that they can, if they're finding that it's something they really can't sit with, that they can leave. But I think, you know, for my own kids who are very different people, I think they could both sit through these lessons. And even if they're like, oh my gosh, you know, or like what, that they could process it, they would talk about it. And I think that they would be better for it, for learning about it. And they are going to have to learn about it.
So then that's the point. So you feel comfortable letting your children or having them have that knowledge at a certain age. Other parents are comfortable with a different level, a different age of that level. Doesn't mean one answer is right or wrong. It's up to the parent.
Correct.
If we're, and my other point too is, if we're trying to protect children, right? These topics in some fashion, I believe, should be touched upon. But then if we're trying to protect children, we should be teaching them more about empowerment then and advocacy and making sure that that is a stronger component than some of these other issues. If we're truly trying to protect children, to stand up for themselves, then we have to give them the tools when someone is harmfully touching them of what to do and how to empower themselves. And I understand it's difficult because a lot of times it's done by adults to children, and they have learned that, you know, the power of an adult, and it's hard to break that cycle. But if that's truly the goal, then why aren't we doing more empowerment?
And that is built into the standards. It is the
And
empowerment, the
that should be
self-advocacy,
above
the
and
going.
beyond anything else, because that will take on through life.
I read,
Yeah.
I only read the K through 2 because I was curious, but I was actually, I noted that in so many places that, and I even wrote it down here, you know, it's about boundaries, and it's about who's, you know, who's allowed to touch you, you know, who's allowed to talk to you certain ways. And so, I mean, I was actually impressed that it wasn't just in the sort of that more like health, and, you know, it was sort of throughout about children sort of understanding their own boundaries, and learning how to communicate those. So, I mean, I expect that goes through, and I completely 100% think the most important thing is to say to kids, you know, this is, you have your boundaries, this is what people are allowed to do. And if anybody tries to mess with that, here are your resources. Because I think that that's actually the best way to, you know, be healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, is to let people know what you are okay with and what is not okay. And for us to say, you know, obviously physical, domestic abuse, all of that's never okay. What does it look like? I think that is the most important way to empower kids.
And it does start out that way. It gradually, sequentially grows in what they're talking about. But even at the K2 level, it's talking about like some kids want to run up and give other kids a hug, and not all kids like that. They don't want them near them. They think they refer to it as like their space bubble. Right. And then it goes all the way up to sexual assault and how you be assertive and you can be firm and strong and walk away, get out of situations and go to trusted adults again, and it slowly, gradually builds.
So how, health lesson in regards to pregnancy and,
Parenting.
reproduction,
Mhm.
parenting, so
Mhm.
how long is a lesson?
So it depends on the grade level, but you mean as far as how long, like how many minutes, how many?
So I would assume K through 2
Mhm.
is going to cover how many days versus
think it's
11
more-
to 12.
More units than that.
It is. And so we're really looking at like, again, we're going to have to put out, like I have literally like timelines from teachers of when things would be taught from that K6 grade level to the 7-8 grade level to the 9-12 grade levels. And so the letters and information that comes out notifying parents of that we'll be able to specify that. But right now we're looking at like January, February, like that. In 5th and 6th grade, there's a lot more standards.
It depends. So like in theory,
Generally.
the way I see it is the teacher will communicate with the parents, like, hey, over the next 10 days, here's what we'll be focusing on as part of pregnancy or whatever it may be. And parents,
So let's go through a middle school, let's go through middle school.
Mhm.
You have block scheduling every other day.
Right.
10 days, that's possibly 5 classes at 80 minutes a block that this child could be excused from. Is that what I'm hearing?
It is.
could be, yeah.
Possibly.
If they're gonna be
That's
excused the
fine.
whole, yeah, if they're gonna be excused. the whole
Yeah,
year.
looking at the timeline for 7th and 8th grade. And again, this is a draft, things
Yeah, no,
change, but like,
Yeah. When you're talking like in 6th grade, 2 lessons, is it gonna be 3 lessons?
so 6th grade was typically about 4 lessons prior to the new standards. It will be more lessons than that in 6th grade now. It could be as many as 8 lessons. So it does, and again, it depends on which standards, like when we look at all the standards within those 2 areas of
So if
parenting and
you're
pregnancy.
adding- Just out of curiosity, if you're adding more,
Mhm.
what do you think you're running?
It's more going in depth around those same topics. There really isn't much being taken away. That's something
So
that,
how can you
you
take one lesson that's 4 weeks, expand it possibly to 8, or 8 lessons rather than weeks. And not take away something else like, health and wellness with nutrition or something.
it's not that things are necessarily going away, but some things that maybe were like a project spread over 4 lessons are now going to be more of a lesson that's more directed, still collaborative with student talk and things, but not like a lesson project that
Quite
kids are
honestly,
working
that
on.
Every curriculum area.
I understand.
They can't.
Because it just has to be.
Say, I already had this and they're adding stuff, when am I gonna have time to do it? So, it makes it challenging and, some things they may not be able to get into as great as depth as all, but
And so. What is it up? So you obviously then have to say, well, I don't have enough time, I'm kind of pushing this down the road, kicking the can down the road with my lessons. And not through any fault of the teacher, just the way the time is, kids ask a question. How does that like,
that's a conversation I would think among the teachers, decide where the areas of focus are gonna be and, perhaps something in 7th and maybe we have to do more in 8th and then how that kind of plays out to cover all the material. And I think for you, honestly, you're getting into the weeds. And I think the best thing is more the communication from the teacher is gonna be used for you.
yeah, I understand that, but as a parent, want to know, am I gonna opt out or opt in for 4 lessons or 8 lessons?
And the only way you're gonna find that out is when the teacher communicates. with you.
Okay,
I mean, I don't think you're gonna answer that tonight.
I'm not looking for that answer tonight, but I'm, a general idea of how long you intend these lessons or units to be.
Right.
It's really my intention of that.
And
How long you
remember,
think each unit-
so at the K6 level too, I mean, health is once a week. It's not, it's not like when we say it's going to be like in the month of January, it's not 20 days in January, 20
Right.
lessons, it's 4, so if that helps at those grade levels, but you're right, at the middle school, high school, it's on a block schedule. It is
It's a big.
every
chunk
other
of time.
day.
at least for this year.
Right.
It's on the blocks.
Oh. So.
No. Something we're looking.
Any other questions while we're still live streaming, or should we? Well, I appreciate you being here tonight. I appreciate people from home watching. I am going to stop the live stream, I believe.